Paddy, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe. Ko Paddy Geddes tōku ingoa. I'm from 350 Pōneke, and we're about to deliver this climate bill to Meridian Energy, one of New Zealand's 5 gentailers, generator retailers. We'd like to bring the public's attention to the fact that since 2014 these gentailers collectively have distributed over $8.7 billion in dividends to their shareholders, whilst only making around $5.3 billion in terms of profits. That's roughly about $3.5 billion of excess dividend they've paid out when they should have been investing in renewable energy or reducing power prices for consumers. So we're just calling them out on this. We think there's a strong case for a windfall tax on these profits. There's a bigger issue in our view around the way the electricity market incentivises this sort of behaviour. To give an example of Meridian, they were caught back in 2019 spilling an enormous amount of excess water from their hydro dams to artificially inflate the price which the customer paid at a time of peak demand. We calculated that was about, they took in about $80 million extra revenue as a result of that single action alone. So we think there's something seriously rotten with the way that the market is structured and how these operators function within it. So we're calling on the government to investigate this as a matter of urgency, to investigate a windfall tax, to investigate energy strategy which is going to benefit the climate and also New Zealand consumers. So,
what would that sort of energy strategy look like? Talking about more kind of regulations of some sort?
It could be a number of things. It could be also just accelerating the amount of renewable energy which is in the system, forcing generators, retailers to invest in some of these projects which they've had on their books for a long time, for some strange reason haven't decided to build them. So, you know, there is a pipeline of renewable energy generation in the pipeline, but it's some very odd behaviour. It's just not getting built, and that's the problem. And we think that there is a much greater role for community energy in this mix. You know, communities should be able to generate their own electricity and distribute it locally. At the current way the market is structured is all from in one direction, from the generator through the lines companies to the consumer. That needs to change. There needs to be a lot more distributed energy resources and community energy generation. So there's a role for government in enabling the regulation which makes this possible. At the moment it's almost impossible for a community energy project to get off the ground. That needs to change.
What would a community energy project look like?
Community energy project could be a range of things. It could be a wind turbine locally purchased, stood up, local battery energy storage, which could then they could draw down at times of peak demand. There's all sorts of ways and means that could be structured, but it's really it requires the industry to be set up in such a way that allows consumers to plug into the grid and be able to sell back to the grid at times when they have excess power and be able to draw down when they don't, and then also distribute it amongst their communities.
Do we really need a whole new company or a corporation for that? Can't we just get technology? Like, aren't there devices that we can install on our own properties for that kind of thing?
That's right. So technology is changing very, very quickly, and there are already some really interesting models out there. Solar NZ, for example, which basically pays for the installation of solar panels up front on people's houses, and then they manage them remotely, and then the consumer benefits from it, but also there's a commercial incentive for that company. So but they're kind of right at they're forerunners. So we need more of these type of initiatives. They can come in all sorts of different forms, but at the moment what we're convinced of is the generator retailers have far too much power in the market. They can dictate situations. Even though Meridian, for example, only has renewable energy generation, they benefit from there being fossil fuel energy, thermal generation in the market. It's quite a complex thing to people to understand, but basically the most expensive form of generation is the fossil fuel component, and the cheapest is the renewables. And when they're generated at the same time, both in demand, the renewable energy generators get the same price as the thermal generators.
Even though they're cheaper to set up and install. And
they're paying hardly anything to generate the power, and they're getting this massive surplus of funds on top of that, because they're basically getting the price they're able to charge is the fossil fuel rate, but the generation cost is renewable. So there's something seriously wrong. So if we want to get to 100% renewable energy, the generator retailers are never going to want to get rid of that last 5-10%, because that's actually what's giving them the profits.
It's been interesting to see how many different corporations there are available for people to get their energy from these days. You're saying the market can't decide, or won't help the options like, for example, ecotricity, or the more community-based options like Toast from Sustainability Trust. They won't eventually rise to the top, given a bit more time and people's awareness of them.
We don't think, not in the current paradigm, or too slowly under the current paradigm. As I say, those generator retailers have far too much power. They are supplying the bulk of the generation, which the retailers are forced to consume. So the interesting thing to consider here is that those generators, the big hydro dams that were built in the Think Big project and earlier, they were paid for by the state, and at some point in time when they got privatised, that was a transfer of that asset from public hands into private hands, and now there's private benefit on these assets which were paid for by the public. So there's something inherently wrong with this. So these generator retailers, they need to be pulling their weight, basically.
Tell us more about yourself and your personal motivations for being worried about all this.
Oh wow, I think I'm just like most people. We hear the news, and we are frustrated by the lack of progress and proactively transitioning to a safe climate. Right, we've known about this problem for a very long time. I've been with 350 since about 2015, and I've had a lot of time to ask, well, what are the barriers to us getting there? What are the blockers? And trying to highlight where they are. So just to sort of to make the transition, we've had a lot of wins, particularly in the financial divestment space, and now we're really kind of bringing this, what we see as a really key issue, to the New Zealand public consciousness in the lead up to the election. It's climate change policy and response is complicated on one level, but then very simple on another. Very simple is that you just need to reduce your emissions, right? Complicated is what are the levers you pull to do that, and how do you bring people along with you? That's complicated, and it requires you to pull lots of levers very carefully in a very coordinated manner. It's the way I could best describe it. And so I think we've made some good progress in New Zealand with setting up the architecture around how those levers get pulled. This election is going to be crucial. I'm personally very concerned about what a coalition with the ACT Party would do to our current climate change settings. I'm campaigning for us to have a climate-friendly government, whatever colour that is. I'm just concerned that climate denial has morphed into a different form. Now it's used to be climate's not a problem or it doesn't exist. Now it's too late and we just need to focus on adaptation. This is the kind of rhetoric which is coming out of the likes of the ACT Party and other parties. And they say, well, sorry, you need to do both, right? Because you can't just focus on adaptation. and then it just gets steadily worse and worse and worse. What are you adapting to? Where's your baseline? So I do a lot of thinking about it. Lots of people do it. I mean, probably like you, we're all concerned about our kids, about our grandkids. They're the people who are going to have to will inherit this. We're the last generation which has a chance to do something about it. Really, that's the truth of it. On a day like this, you think, oh, what's wrong? It's hard to get people fired up about something when you've got such beautiful days like this. But the climate is changing. It's changing in geological terms incredibly fast. And unfortunately, we humans just don't feel it. We deal well with crises. Think Cyclone Gabrielle, right? But the slow moving, we need really considered action. We're not good at it as human beings. So I understand why we're in this position on one level, but that's not an excuse for not acting. So,
what's your background that gives you insight, or that maybe leads you to being more concerned with the average person?
I don't think I'm more concerned than the average person. I think I don't have any fear of putting myself out there, and other people, struggle with that. And I totally get that. But not a lot of good things happen in society without the activist edge. That's my view. You need someone to stand up. And actually, it doesn't take that many people to stand up and change will happen. So that's been my experience of 350. We've been small numbers, but we've actually had significant impact, particularly around financial divestment. It's trillions and trillions of dollars now which have been divested through actions of small groups of people and small organisations, and it's snowballed. So the challenge is really, there's a real challenge around greenwashing at the moment. Now that sort of climate change and green has become mainstream, there's a real problem around accountability and clarity and transparency. But that's something we need to work through as a society.
Tell us more about what happened today around the country at 350.
Well, we have groups all up and down the Motu, and we have been presenting these climate bills to gentailers, Meridian and Genesis specifically, just putting them on notice that they can't get away with what they're doing and not expect us to call them to account. It's just, they're in a climate crisis. We need considered action, and the status quo should not consider it. And I think they're going to get a rude awakening in the form of, I think the public will change, and technology will push them out. It will push them to the margins. I'm just hoping it'll happen fast enough. I just don't.
Say actions all around the islands.
Auckland, Christchurch, Dunedin, and Wellington.
Correct. Yeah. And what exactly has been presented to Meridian and?
Oh, it's just our beautiful climate bill. It's saying we're charging you owe us 8.7 billion, or you owe the New Zealand public 8.7 billion. You are partially responsible for all of this damage which happened under Cyclone Gabrielle, because it's part and parcel. We're not transitioning fast enough, and the gentailers are putting a handbrake on that. So they're responsible. They're partly responsible. Not responsible for it all, but they're partly responsible for it. Yeah.
They're also responsible to their shareholders. So if they paid all that money for those things, which seems right and fair, that would also mean that there's no profit to maintain the company, and so they'd probably put the electricity prices up even higher.
Well, what stops prices from going up is competition, right? It's not. People can switch providers, but at the moment it's more like shifting deck chairs. It's not this. There appear to be lots of options, but actually at its core, we're entirely dependent on this generating of these 5 big players, right? So that needs to be broken up. Personally, be all for breaking up from Meridian, the retail end from the generator end. So we don't need any more. We don't need gentailers. We can just have retailers. It's like we did with telecom in the 90s, Set up Chorus and we set up Spark.
who would own the generators?
Well, they would still. You can't just take them off people. People own them now, so they could. They would own 51% in the retail arm and the
people.
Well, that's right. The government owns 51% in these entities. So this is the interesting thing, is they are actually. I think of it as like indirect taxation. You know, the National Party and the ACT Party complain about taxation. Well, you've got a classic example of indirect taxation happening within these organisations. That government-owned organisations, they're creaming it and paying some of that to individual shareholders, and they're taking it in as tax revenue. Well, it's all very well. Wouldn't it be better if that money was put in the pockets of consumers? I would have thought so. So there's kind of odd messaging going on. But,
at least reducing the price of electricity substantially. Yeah. Okay.
Anyway.
All right.
Is that all? That was kind of an interrogation. That's good.
What else is it worth us knowing about?
Watch this space. There is a petition attached to this, calling on the government. We're calling on the government to accelerate the transition, and we're just highlighting the fact that a big part of the problem is the way the market is structured with these very powerful generator retailers who are just something needs to happen.
And how can people find out more information or learn about 350?
They can go to 350, just Google 350 Aotearoa homegrown energy, and they'll get to the latest.
The petition is there too?
Yep.
Awesome. Paddy.
Cheers, mate.
Kia ora atu mo tēnei wā.
Cheers.
Thank you for this time.